Buffalo Bills.
Ah,
C+ for the Buffalo Bills.
thought you were going to go into my twitching bicep because that's quite uncomfortable.
We're not. Listen, we got to stay on point here. We're not going to talk about you being in your 40s. So Buffalo Bills, Trevor's going C+ here, and it's a fascinating offseason because just look at the list on the screen if you're on YouTube. Released Jordan Poyer and Mitch Morse and Naheem Hines, Deontay Hardy, released Tre'Davious White.
A lot of turnover.
Yes, there's a lot of turnover. But at the same time, we've seen, in the history of the NFL, especially in the salary cap era, you used to see this all the time where teams lost veterans and just trusted their young players. I think Minnesota did a little bit of this last year. And if Minnesota didn't have their quarterback issue, Kirk Cousins getting hurt, it may not have affected them all that much. So what are your thoughts on the Bills and just getting younger on both sides of the ball?
Yeah, so I struggle to sort of find a really positive spin on their wide receiver situation, which again has had a ton of turnover. It is a fair point to make that, okay, look at what was available to them. What would you have had them do? What was the optimal strategy here, right? Because that's sort of what you hear analytics people and generally second guessing moves that NFL front offices make, et cetera, et cetera.
Just the ones that were made, right?
Right, and usually. So it's what was the optimal strategy here? And it's done in abstract terms. And a lot of the time you don't actually look at the players available. And I think it's fair to say, look, if you had a wide receiver problem this offseason, it was a bad year for that to be the case. Particularly if you needed a number one X wide receiver, right? And you were drafting where the Bills were drafting, i.e. you didn't have a chance at Marvin Harrison Jr. or Malik Neighbors or one of those guys. So from that point of view, I think it's a fair point to say, look, Buffalo has made a bunch of sort of slightly strange moves at wide receiver, but what would you have had them do instead, right? Because, nobody traded for Brandon Ayuk. You can take that to mean nobody offered or simply that he wasn't available, right? If you assume that Brandon Ayuk or T. Higgins or whatever were not available to Buffalo, Michael Pittman Jr. never hit the open market, neither did Mike Evans. The options out there to have just replaced Stephon Diggs and said, we're good, we're not great, right? And similarly, in the draft, once you got down to the low 20s, the three guys that everyone thought were superstars were gone, and everyone else, there's a question mark of some variety, right? And Keon Coleman ends up being the guy they settle on. However, the Stephon Diggs thing was a move of their own making. They could have just kept him, right? Now, maybe he would have been a pain in the ass, and that's its own thing, but they chose to trade away a legitimate outside X wide receiver and not have a ready-made replacement for him available. And what we are seeing is the inevitable outcome of that, which is they've struggled to replace him, and that does look to be a hole in this offense. And I'm a little bit scared of them articulating that Keon Coleman's going to get the first chance to fix that because it doesn't seem like what he's best suited to do, nor is it what Khalil Shakir is best suited to do, nor is it what Curtis Samuel is best suited to do, or, Dalton Kincaid or any of those guys, right? And now Marquez Valdes-Scantling comes in, and somebody pointed out yesterday, he's now, in his NFL career, his quarterbacks have been Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, and now Josh Allen.
I pointed it out. He is a 3-time MVP creator and a 2-time Super Bowl champion. In 2020 and 21, he had MVP Aaron Rodgers, 22 MVP and Super Bowl champion Mahomes, 23 Super Bowl champion.
Well, the other way of looking
Josh
at that,
Allen, and then you say 2024, Josh Allen, question mark.
Yeah. The other way of looking at that is with the quarterbacks that have thrown the football in the direction of MVS, how have his statistics and production been as bad as they have been?
Because he's a pure deep threat with bad hands.
Right. So this is my point, right? Is you're adding this guy and you're like, okay, he can actually do some of the things that you're questioning the other guys on this roster whether they have the capability of doing that. He, however, can't do much else.
I mean, they signed him.
All he can do is win against press coverage outside and get deep.
They signed him for like $2 million to be wide receiver
But that's my
4/5.
Well, yeah, but not so much that. They've signed him because he's a guy that can play outside, defeat press coverage, and beat man coverage down the field, which a lot of these other guys don't seem like they necessarily can do. And you're like, okay, that's stylistically, that's a good fit. That's adding the missing component, but it's adding the missing component from a player that's proven he can't make a big impact overall on the team. So the overall sense here is this receiving core is probably worse than it was heading into last year.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely worse. I mean, they lost Gabe Davis, had essentially a wide receiver need.
Right.
They bring in a Curtis Samuel, but you still have an outside wide receiver need before they traded Stephon Diggs.
Yes.
I guess what I'm interested in now for the Bills is to make this all work. Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, and Keon Coleman, all really good after the catch type of guys. Dalton Kincaid, a really good short area after the catch type of guy. James Cook out of the backfield. There were points last season, including in the Chiefs game. Remember, they ran a very good game plan against the Chiefs. Control the ball, control the clock, the thing that you would encourage a team to do. The Bills were just so depleted on the defensive side of the ball. This was in the playoff game, I believe, or maybe in the regular season game. They're so in the playoff game. They were so depleted on the defensive side of the ball they couldn't make a stop against the Chiefs. So I'm curious how much the Bills are going to go to this take pressure off of Josh Allen.
Yeah.
And then, because we say this every year, right? You can't just let him be Superman from week 1 through 17 nonstop. How much of it's going to be a little bit more run game, a little bit more yak centered? It's a full year of Joe Brady as offensive coordinator, and they're putting those pieces in place. So it doesn't, again, on paper, it doesn't feel great because at some point you're still going to be in 3rd and 10, and you want Stephon Diggs, caliber receiver, to get open, and Josh Allen to get him the ball.
Yeah, that's the one thing that can possibly ameliorate some of this problematic roster construction. Yes, is not a word you're familiar with. Is if they fundamentally change the way this offense works, which, they might this year because, as you said, first full year of Joe Brady, it's going to be his offense, not whatever version of the previous offense he was able to cobble together live on the fly last season. So if you look at this and say, all right, we don't have a Stephon Diggs anymore, we don't even have a Gabe Davis anymore, but we have a bunch of guys that are all slot options or yak guys, maybe we can create a different type of offense where they all look better. The other thing is, they've done a little bit of what we preach in terms of they've thrown a lot of darts at this thing, right? Now, you look at the darts they've thrown, right? It doesn't really feel like there's a winning dart in there necessarily.
That receiver?
Yeah. But, just guys that have been added, right? Marquez Valdes-Scantling, Keon Coleman, Mac Hollins, Chase Claypool was another guy that they signed randomly between the draft and now. They have thrown a lot of darts at this thing.
Guys that I liked 4 or 5 years ago, too,
right.
Yeah.
And you're like, it's sort of like, remember the Colts a few years ago where Colts fans were painting this picture where every one of these high risk, high risk, deep odds, outside chance guys all hit the high end of their range of outcomes. You're like, if all that happens, this is a good receiving core. It's like this, right? If all of these crazy darts that they've thrown hit, it's fine. But even if one of them hits, they're in a good spot.
It just doesn't always work out for receiving cores. It works better for offensive
well,
linemen.
The problem is if you need more than one to hit, it's not going to happen.
A lot of the quote-unquote big-name players, the Tre'Davious Whites and Mitch Morses of the world, they have replacements in-house or guys that got to play when they were hurt. So it's probably not going to be as bad as it feels here during the offseason for the Bills.
And, if no other reason than Josh Allen is the quarterback.
And Josh Allen. Yeah, of course.